In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to actually apply your minimum holistic goal to help you make better decisions throughout your homesteading journey. First, let's do a quick recap of what we've done thus far. By now, you should have a complete minimum holistic goal. This includes the following. In section 1, you defined the economic whole under management, which had 3 parts. In part 1, you listed who the primary decision makers are for your homestead and which kinds of decisions they are responsible for making. Remember, we used the decision tree, root, trunk, branch, and leaf model for this. You also decided who has the power of veto and at which level of decision. And hopefully you put at least some preliminary effort into agreeing on how you'll handle disagreement without bogging down your project or damaging precious egos. In part 2, you defined your resource base, everything that is available to your project, including both physical forms of capital and the human resources that you can access. And in part 3, you outlined at a high level the money and other forms of financial capital that are available to your homestead endeavor. In section 2, we did the deep introspective dive to create your quality of life statement, a clear and emotionally resonant statement of how you want your life to be based on what you value most. You framed your quality of life statement in terms of what physical and cultural conditions are required for you to realize that desired quality of life, what you want to give and receive in your relationships, the skills you want to develop, and what you want to contribute to the well-being of those beyond you and your immediate family. This statement is the magnetized needle on your compass and the thing that you're going to use to test your future homestead decisions. In section 3, we talked about profit and how your homestead needs to be profitable and how that profit can come in many different forms beyond dollars and cents or line items on a spreadsheet. I then asked you to describe the forms of production that you will have to generate in order to sustain the quality of life you desire, such that for every distinct need within your quality of life statement, there was at least one form of production that can meet that need. And then finally, based on your understanding of what you know you have to produce to realize your desired quality of life, I asked you to describe the state of your resource base, as it would have to be 100 or more years into the future to sustain the quality of life you envision for you and all your posterity. There were 3 parts to this description: the land you live on, the people with whom you and your business are in relationship, and the culture and services within the community that you want to live in. If you've got at least a complete draft of your MHG at this point, you have literally done what 98% of people don't do. You've constructed a tool that you can use to consciously design your life and your homestead landscape to maximize your freedom, resilience, and prosperity, come what may in the disruptive decades ahead. Now that you've got this tool, I'm going to show you how to leverage it to generate the maximum positive impact for your homestead, your life, and the lives of those that you care deeply about. To start, I'd like to actually share an excerpt from Alan Savory's book that speaks to exactly what these decision tests that we're going to cover are all about. The power of these tests lies in having a holistic context. In this case, that's going to be your minimum holistic goal. All actions must be tested towards the holistic context, without which they become meaningless. The following 7 tests can be applied to design decisions as they need to be made in order to verify that 1, the decision does in fact have to be made, and 2, that the available choices will in fact lead you towards realizing your desired quality of life and a larger vision for your project, land base, enterprise, or other initiative. So a few things to note here. First, these tests can be applied to decisions, quote, as they need to be made. This means they're meant for use in the field or in the moment. They're a way to cut through the noise or to quickly sift through a pile of choices to find the very best one given your context. Second, the tests are used to verify if in fact a decision has to be made at all. It's very easy to be swept into thinking that you have to decide something if you never first determine whether or not that is actually true. Bottom line, you don't want to make unnecessary decisions. It's a drain on your limited mental energy, and your time and focus are shifted away from things that actually matter, the things that move the needle. Third, these tests are meant to ensure that the decisions you make do in fact move you in the right direction. And they do this by quickly and clearly holding up whatever the decision is to the clarifying light of your MHG. Applying these tests will integrate your MHG into the process of designing, developing, and managing your homestead to a point where you won't need to even think about them anymore. You'll just know what's right for you and make the call. In time, you'll start to witness the natural compounding of the right decisions made at the right time and in the right order, especially once your living systems really start to pop. The abundance that results from the synergies you create will become a significant management task all to itself. Okay, without further ado, let's get into test number 1. This is cause and effect. This test is all about identifying the root cause of the problem. You need to repeatedly ask yourself, what is the actual cause of, and then name your problem, until you drill down to the core problem. You should always start your decision testing with this test. Always do this test first. Get yourself in the habit of always looking for the root cause or the core problem first. If you find that the action in question does not address the root cause of the problem, then it's effectively a waste of time, money, energy, and resources, and not worth doing, and you don't need to devote any more of your precious mental energy to considering it. Once you get in the habit of drilling down to the root cause of the problem, you'll notice that the vast majority of root causes fall into one of two categories. It'll either be a resource management problem or a people problem, a human behavior problem. So resource management problems come in four basic flavors. The first is a water cycle. Is it effective or non-effective? Effective water cycling on your property occurs when plants make maximum use of precipitation received. Evaporative losses are low, runoff is minimal or slow, and doesn't carry organic matter or soil with it, and the water-air balance in the soil is healthy. Non-effective water cycling is the opposite. It occurs when plants have minimal opportunity to utilize the full amount of precipitation received, there's high evaporation and high runoff, and soils have poor water-air balance. Water is the universal hydrator, the blood of the earth and required by all life. If the water patterning on your homestead isn't optimized, you're either losing a lot of production, actively drawing down the productive capacity of your land, or most commonly both. Second is the mineral cycle. This basically boils down to whether or not your management decisions are building more biologically active living soil or not. Only through living soil are life-sustaining nutrients cycled within your landscape. The wealth of any homestead can be measured by the quality and quantity of its soil. Third is energy flow. Is your homestead capturing the maximum amount of solar energy and converting that into biomass through photosynthesis? This is the foundation for all life, economy, and civilization on this planet. And what is true at the macro scale is also true at the scale of your homestead. Are you maximizing your returns on the abundant and free energy that shines down on you and your homestead every day? If not, your land or your management practices need to heal or change, often by making changes to your mineral and water cycles. And the fourth resource management realm is community dynamics. Are you managing your landscape above and below ground to maximize biodiversity and ecological stability? This is critical to creating resilient living systems. I'm not going to go into each of these cycles right now, as they are all incredibly broad and deep lines of study. If you want to read Alan's writings on these, he devotes a chapter to each of them in his book, Holistic Management, between pages 101 and 149. For now, it is just important that you know that these are the big four levers that you'll likely need to pull should you identify a root cause resource problem using this first test. The other type of root cause problem you are likely to identify are people problems, human behavior problems. These can be the hardest problems to solve, and they can also be the greatest potentiators of you achieving a successful outcome. The first thing you need to do if you identify a root cause problem that is a human behavior issue is to search for the cause in organization, management, communication, and leadership styles. In other words, first look to yourself. Be wary of pointing the finger too quick. Remember, anytime you point a finger, there's always three more pointing back at you. Here are a couple helpful resources. First is Creating a Life Together, Practical Tools to Grow Eco-Villages and Intentional Communities, a book by Diane Leaf Christian, in particular chapters 5 and 6, and The Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision-Making by Sam Kainer. Both books are excellent resources when it comes to helping groups make better decisions and function more seamlessly. Okay, test number 2. We call this one the weakest link. When you created your MHG, in section 3, you listed the necessary forms of production that you and your homestead will have to generate in order to meet the needs laid out in your quality of life statement. Each of these forms of production has a chain of production that goes into producing them. That chain is a linked set of processes, events, or decisions that yield the final product. In order to strengthen any chain of production when resources are limited, which for our purposes, we're going to say they always are, one must always attend to the weakest link first. Said another way, your entire chain of production is only as strong as its weakest link. This does not mean that you need to do everything for yourself. In many cases, forming a relationship or partnership that performs the duties of your weakest link far better and more efficiently than you ever could will make for a more resilient and profitable homestead. There are generally 3 categories of weakest links: social, biological, and financial. So for social weak links, ask yourself if the action you are considering, due to prevailing attitudes or beliefs, could create a weak link in the chain of actions leading towards your holistic goal. You want to use this test when the contemplated action you're considering will affect the people whose support you need. For example, let's say you're considering planting a highly beneficial multifunctional tree like a black locust as part of your food forest fertility backbone, but it just so happens that that tree would have to be right next to your neighbor's fence line, and you know that your neighbor has professed a profound hatred for such weed trees. Are you planting a long-term fertility boost, or are you actually sowing the seeds of a festering neighborhood drama? Perhaps you'd want to consider another legume tree that your neighbor would actually appreciate and one that won't incur over-the-fence resentment. For biological weak links, you want to ask, does this action address the weakest point in the life cycle of the organism, whether the goal is to increase it or decrease it? You want to use this test when an action is being considered to increase or decrease the numbers of a certain organism. This can apply to living capital in all its forms: plants, animals, fungi, insects, bacteria, you name it. As an example, if you were trying to grow more black soldier fly larvae for your chickens, or you wanted to reduce the presence of an insect pest, like ticks or mosquitoes, but in an ecologically healthy way, you would want to intervene at the point where that organism's life cycle is weakest. That's where you can exert the greatest leverage on either increasing its numbers or decreasing its numbers. The key takeaway here is that the weakest link is your highest leverage point, whether you're attempting to grow more or less of something. If you're not sure if the proposed action addresses the weakest link, then it's a good time to learn a bit more about the organism, its life cycle, its habitat preferences, nutritional and environmental requirements, its relationships with other organisms, etc. And finally, we have financial weak links. You want to ask, does this action strengthen the weakest link in the chain of production? Use this test when there's an unsustainable cost of production relative to profit. And it's worth noting here that the products that you finally sell are not what's actually responsible for your profit. How you reinvest your money in the chain of production each year is. As an example, let's say you've identified high animal feed costs as your weakest link in the chain of production. In order to reduce your feed costs and improve nutrition, you might choose to grow fodder trees in your pastures, stacking an additional yield into an unutilized space, the vertical element. These trees can then be browsed by the animals or can be cut and dried annually to make tree hay, and thereby lower your winter hay expenditures. The trees in the pasture also serve to provide shade and wind protection and thereby decrease animal stress and improve their feed conversion, all of which leads to animals that gain weight faster. Okay, test number 3, marginal reaction. The marginal reaction test ensures that your commitment of time, effort, and money provides the maximum possible thrust towards your holistic goal at any moment. Said another way, this test is used to determine which option yields the biggest bang for the buck. So you want to ask, which action provides the greatest return in terms of your holistic goal for the time and money spent? No two actions can possibly generate the same return for each unit of effort. In this case, your life energy, which can be measured in money or in time. When resources are limited, you want to select the one from which you gain the most. Seems pretty obvious. In doing so, you will end up spending less time and money and achieve what you want to more quickly. This sounds incredibly obvious, and it is. This is common sense decision making, so make sure to use it. You want to use this test when there are expenditures to be made, but there are alternatives to choose from. It is worth noting that sometimes expenditures must be made and there are no alternatives. With these, you just have to suck it up and cut the check. This test only applies when there's 2 or more options being compared. Sometimes you can actually put all the figures into a spreadsheet and come out with a cut and dry answer, and in those situations, you should definitely do that. In most cases, however, you'll be weighing things against one another that elude precise quantification. In these instances, a good old-fashioned bulleted list of pros and cons is your best friend. Know that going into this test, your judgment will be highly subjective. The answers you arrive at will only be as good as your knowledge, common sense, and determination to achieve your holistic goal, which is yet another reason why having it clearly defined from the beginning is so very important. Okay, test number 4, gross profit analysis, aka show me the money. Gross profit analysis test is used to select those enterprises that, after all the associated costs and risks have been factored in, produce the most income. The income from these enterprises has to cover overhead costs and then some in order for there to be profit, and a healthy homestead has to be profitable. So for this test, you want to ask yourself which enterprises contribute the most to covering the overheads of the business, homestead, or lifestyle, And drilling down a bit further, which elements, systems, or enterprises bring in the most money for the least additional cost? You want to use this test when you're comparing two or more systems of production, or when you're comparing different scales of production within the same enterprise. What do I mean by that? When performing a gross profit analysis test, you need to consider a few things. The first are fixed costs. These are those costs of production that are constant in a given enterprise. As an example, let's say I have a sawmill that I purchased using credit. The payments and interest on that sawmill represent a fixed cost. They must be paid whether the sawmill gets used or not. Then we have variable costs. Those are the costs that vary with the scale of production. Using the sawmill example again, this includes things like replacement chains, fuel, lubricant, regularly scheduled maintenance hours. The more wood I mill, the higher these costs are going to be. And third, you need to look at the scale of evaluation. You need to determine what metric you're using to evaluate a given enterprise. It could be gross profit per acre, or gross profit per dollar of capital invested, or gross profit per human hour of labor input. You have to choose what makes the most sense based on the system or the enterprise. Generally, when land area is the most limiting factor, choosing some measure of gross profit per unit area, could be acres, hectares, square feet, is going to be most helpful. If you're examining a service or knowledge-based enterprise, gross profit per human labor hour makes the best sense. As an example, let's say you've selected pigs as an appropriate livestock to have on your homestead. You'd like to raise them to stock your own freezers in the fall, and their innate rooting behaviors will be valuable to help you clear the undergrowth in a patch of forest that let's say you're looking to open up for future mushroom log production. You want 2 pigs for your freezer. How many pigs are you going to raise? I know this sounds like a middle school word problem, but stick with me here. In terms of the infrastructure involved and the time spent tending the pigs, there isn't a whole lot of difference between tending 2 pigs and tending 6. In other words, the fixed cost of raising 2 pigs versus raising 6 is fairly comparable. Would it make more sense to raise 6 pigs with roughly the same infrastructure and labor inputs, and then sell 4 finished hogs at the end of the season to cover your feed costs, your infrastructure investment, and perhaps even some of your labor while you put 2 in the freezer? So this is a question that gets at what is the appropriate scale of your homestead piggery so that the system generates surplus that will pay you to put pork in your freezer. That's what this test is all about. Making the absolute best use of your time and capital investment to generate a healthy surplus that puts money back in your pocket, frees up more time in your day, and ideally both. All right, so that's gross profit analysis. I hope you're starting to see that these tests are really just common sense questions to ask yourself when you're making decisions that will have a substantial impact on your quality of life. What we're really doing here is making explicit mention of the critical thinking that goes into making sound decisions for your future. Okay, on to the next. Number 5, resource acquisition and use. This test is used to help you determine if your use of various forms of money, energy, and resources are holistically sound. In other words, are they in alignment with your desired quality of life and the necessary state of your future resource base? So you want to ask yourself, is the energy or money to be used in this action derived from the most appropriate source in terms of your holistic goal? Will the way in which the energy or money is to be used lead towards your holistic goal or away from it? Obviously, we want to be moving towards your holistic goal. We need to be very intentional in selecting the source of money or energy and the way in which we utilize it in building the life and homestead that we desire. So you want to use this test when a certain enterprise, system, or process is deemed to be necessary for the function of the larger whole of which it is a part, in this case your homestead, but can be run or operated using different types of energy inputs. Your goal here is to figure out what is the most appropriate type of energy or resource to utilize so that you minimize or eliminate any of the negative second or third order effects of using that resource or money that way. And ideally, you'll create positive second or third order effects that further strengthen the overall resilience, profitability, and ecological robustness of your homestead. Some additional clarifying questions that can be helpful to ask here. 1, is the proposed use providing permanent infrastructure that will assist you in reaching your holistic goal? In other words, are you getting a lasting benefit from this expenditure of money or energy that ideally decreases your need for such expenditures in the future? Is it helping you get off of the hamster wheel? 2, is the proposed use merely consumptive? Is it degenerative or offering no lasting benefit? Or is it cyclical? Is it regenerative? Is it cycling more resources? Is it creating a lasting benefit? 3, is the proposed use addictive in that once initiated, you risk an undesirable dependence on further inputs of energy or money of that particular form? Remember, at the beginning of this course, we talked about wanting to avoid creating treadmills or hamster wheels for ourselves. That's what we're doing here. And 4th, is the proposed use of money or energy using the most appropriate form of the resource in the most constructive way? To help this concept really sink in, I want to share a helpful visual tool with you guys that I call the Regenerative Degenerative Continuum. You can use this simple quad chart to help you take stock of your current and planned patterns of energy, money, and resource use. It visualizes the degree to which a specific use is 1, either regenerative or degenerative, and 2, is it coming from a mindset of abundance versus scarcity? So what are you creating for the long term? The goal, very obviously, is to honestly assess where we're at and methodically move our choices into that upper right quadrant, regenerative use and abundant mindset. Orienting your resource selection and patterns of use towards this quadrant opens up the greatest opportunities for creating maximum freedom and resilience in your life, grounded by having a thriving ecology on your homestead. You can use the continuum to categorize various resources that might be employed in achieving your design vision, using the 5 categories of resources as outlined in the Permaculture Designer's Manual. They're represented here by the different colored numbers 1 through 5. This makes it really easy to plot in which quadrant a given element, system, or enterprise falls on the continuum, and consequently what adjustments may be necessary with regards to resource selection and use to better align with the vision you articulated in your minimum holistic goal. So let's look at the 2 axes of this chart. Running horizontally, we have regenerative on the right and degenerative on the left. For a process to be regenerative is to cycle energy amongst the involved elements and the broader life web in a self-reinforcing pattern of increasing integrity, coherence, and function, which ultimately increases the capacity for life expression of your landscape. By virtue of a regenerative system or a regenerative element or process or life form existing, there's actually more capacity to express life in the environment. Nothing is diminished. There's actually more resources that are made available and the ecosystem function is strengthened. Conversely, a process is degenerative if it moves energy in a linear fashion from integrity, coherence, and function towards disintegration, incoherence, and dysfunction. If such a path is consistently followed, the environment decreases its capacity for life expression. In other words, it displays reduced function. Running top to bottom in this chart, we have abundant mindset on top and scarcity mindset on the bottom. An abundant mindset is creative. It sees obstacles as opportunities for growth and knowledge, capability, perception, and connection. Abundance is a direct antonym for scarcity. It stands for an extremely plentiful or overly sufficient supply, overflowing fullness, affluence, and wealth. The inverse of this is a scarce mindset, which is fear-based and lacks creativity. It sees obstacles as immovable burdens, unfairly dealt out by life's randomness, things that impose disability or misperception and isolation. Scarcity is a direct antonym for abundance, so it stands for insufficiency or shortness of supply, dearth, rarity, infrequency. You get the picture. So next, we need to define the 5 categories of resources. The first category are those which increase by modest use. These are often living things, such as seeds and plants that sprout when browsed or cut, rare breeds of plants and animals that, when raised wisely, increase in number, recycled biomass. Information is also a resource that can increase with use. If it's not used, it usually withers and becomes outdated, but when freely used in exchange, it tends to evolve and increase. This includes things like languages and inherited cultural knowledge. In general, most complex adaptive systems, living or not, increase when used. The second category of resource, number 2, are those which disappear or degrade if not used. Examples might include the unharvested crop of an annual vegetable, or a grass that can be stored for winter hay, seasonal eruptions of oceanic fish when they get together to mate, swarms of bees or grasshoppers, ripe fruit, water runoff during rains, your muscles and bones, right? Muscles and bones atrophy if you don't use them. Manures are very valuable, right? But if we just let them sit or if we concentrate them too much, they actually become a pollutant. A lot of different skills will disappear or degrade if they're not used. Perishable foods will disappear or degrade if not used. Languages and cultural knowledge, again, they need to be used to be maintained. Third category are those resources that are unaffected by use. Some examples might include a beautiful view, or a good climate, the partial diversion of a stream into, say, a hydroelectric generator or an irrigation system, assuming the water is responsibly returned to the stream after use, is also unaffected, as would be, say, a stone pile that's used for mulch or heat storage or for collecting water runoff. A well-managed ecosystem is an example of resources that are unaffected by use. Category 4 are those resources that are reduced by use. Some examples might be a fish or wild game stock that is unwisely managed, anything that is mined, so clay, landlocked salt deposits, coal, oil, rare earth minerals, fertile soils, mature forests. Most of our modern economy kind of falls into at least category 4. And then category 5, these are the ones we really want to avoid, those which pollute or destroy other resources if they're used. So examples include residual poisons that might get dumped into ecosystems from industrial centers. We saw a lot of this in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. Toxic waste in rivers, toxic gases into the air. Obviously, that's still continuing to this day. Radioactives, superhighways, large buildings or areas that are concreted or paved over, sewers running pollutants directly out to the sea or to large water bodies. Any of the agricultural ides, pesticides, fungicides, etc., that destroy soil ecology, toxic reagents that are used in industrial processes. And it's worth noting that in many cases, the way in which a resource is used will shift its categorization. Soils being farmed industrially are a good example. They're ultimately rendered toxic and dead, not only incapable of supporting life, but also a threat to other life forms when, inevitably, that soil erodes by wind and water. Good examples of this are the Salton Sea or the Mississippi Dead Zone, if you want to look those up. Here's a few examples of where certain resources might fall in this chart based on how they are obtained, their essential nature, and how they're used. Let's take an example of diesel fuel used for two different purposes. We can use diesel fuel to run giant earth-moving machines to construct a superhighway, which is itself an incredibly energy-intensive beast with a relatively short lifespan, at least if we're thinking in the 7th generation mindset. It enables additional profligate energy use. In fact, it requires it. And it generally destroys a whole lot of ecosystems during construction as a result of the many second and third order negative impacts. Things like disrupted watersheds, increased flooding, disrupted animal migration patterns, destroyed habitat, etc. Using diesel fuel and all of the energy-intensive extractive industry that goes into creating it to build a piece of infrastructure that necessitates more of the same is far from regenerative. It decreases ecosystem function at many levels and is based on a purely consumptive paradigm, one where we take resources and use them to increase our need and ability to take even more resources. So this gets a category 5 resource score and is coming from a scarcity mindset, hence lower left quadrant. Alternatively, we can use that same diesel fuel to power machinery to construct passive water harvesting earthworks. The diesel fuel itself is still a category 4 resource. It's being reduced by use. However, it's being leveraged to create lasting changes in the landform that will improve hydrological function, thereby increasing the land's ability to capture and convert solar energy into usable biomass, the result of which is more food for more life forms, a more drought-resilient landscape, and a mainframe production system that from this point forward requires no diesel inputs to maintain its function, assuming it was designed properly, of course. So we might score this as a category 4. Still not where we want to be ultimately, but definitely coming from an abundance mindset. We're leveraging the amazing and wonderful once-in-a-planetary lifetime inheritance that fossil fuels are to create a lasting improvement or a repair in an ecosystem to improve its function and productivity while decreasing the need for those future inputs. A great example of an upper right quadrant score is planting fodder trees for livestock, an example I've mentioned numerous times now in this course. Fodder trees, when regularly browsed or cut, resprout and renew themselves. They're actually pollarded fodder trees in the British Isles that are well over 1,000 years old, and they're still going strong. They regenerate year after year, which means they're increasing with modest use. That means they're a category 1 resource. And they've been managed by savvy people over a millennium to meet their needs while at the same time serving as part of the larger ecosystem backbone. So you can go through any system, element, or enterprise that you're considering that either already exists or you're thinking about making a part of your homestead, and analyze the type and pattern of resource use that is required for it to function. If there are resources or patterns of use that don't align with your holistic goal, Then use this chart to brainstorm ideas for what other forms of money, energy, or resources can serve as inputs for that system, or the different ways in which those inputs can be used to create more of what you want and less of what you don't. As a general rule of thumb, you will create more sovereignty in your life if you can design your systems of support to preferentially utilize resources from categories 1, 2, and 3, while limiting or avoiding the use of category 4 resources, except perhaps in emergency situations, and ideally completely avoiding the use of category 5 resources. It's worth noting that this exercise is not about assigning labels of good or bad to different resources. This is about making an honest assessment of what your current energy use pattern is on your homestead, and then looking for ways to increase the alignment between that pattern and your stated quality of life goals. You don't need to cut things out or make your life harder by going cold turkey on a resource that you've hitherto been relying upon. That would be the scarcity mindset taking hold. Think of this as an orienting tool. How are you setting your homestead up to be maximally resilient and abundant in a declining net energy future? Based on what you learned from your assessment, what is your best next step to move in the direction of regenerative process and abundant mindset? Okay, test number 6, the sustainability test, also known as generating lasting wealth. The sustainability test asks you to consider the long-term social, economic, and environmental consequences of your decisions relative to your future resource base. For a decision to pass the sustainability test, it must meet your short-term needs while simultaneously providing a lasting gain, a lasting benefit. Meaning it must be socially, economically, and environmentally sound in terms of meeting both future and present-day needs. Many decisions that can prove correct in the short term have disastrous consequences in the long term. This test aims to avoid such an unfortunate outcome. You want to ask yourself, if you take this action, will it lead towards or away from the future resource base described in your holistic goal? Does the action move the system, process, or enterprise towards a greater degree of energy autonomy and self-sufficiency? And does it increase the availability of inputs, the resources, that are required for it to function? You want to use this test when you're evaluating a system, process, or enterprise for long-term energetic viability. Whatever answer you come up with, you will need to evaluate with regards to its social, economic, and environmental impacts. For social considerations, consider your proposed action with regards to the people you live with, the community you live in, and the community services you would like and or need to have available in your community in the future. What we're talking about here, first and foremost, is the quality of your relationships, social capital, an incredibly powerful form of wealth that requires conscious and constant tending. For economic considerations, you need to ask yourself if your proposed action will increase or decrease the viability of your primary enterprises in a resource-constrained future. Or are you setting yourself up for a fall by creating dependency on a shrinking resource pie? How can you decrease or eliminate your exposure to, say, global commodity prices by insourcing your own necessary inputs? For environmental considerations, you want to examine your proposed action with regards to its impacts on the future state of the land base required to sustain your desired quality of life. So is your system, process, or enterprise dependent on ecologically harmful processes or inputs that will eventually need to be remedied to come into alignment with your desired quality of life and future resource-based goals? It's worth noting that this is another good opportunity to use the Regenerative, Degenerative Continuum tool that was outlined in test number 5 to help qualify your current and future patterns of resource use. You may have heard the term NIMBYism, which stands for not in my backyard. It's the same as wanting the sausage, but not wanting to see how it's made. You'll see it mentioned a lot in association with giant wind turbine installations. Everybody wants, quote, green energy, but no one wants to have a 300-foot tall, noisy bird murderer in their backyard. What you're doing in this step is being honest with yourself as to whether or not you've got any NIMBYism present in your homestead design, which ultimately is a future failure point. Whether you do or do not isn't as important as being aware of it and then orienting yourself to come up with a better, more aligned solution. Certainly last but not least, we have test number 7, called as Society and Culture, also known as the Gut Check Test. More than any of the other tests, the Society and Culture Gut Check Test is, in effect, a test for social consciousness to help ensure that a decision is socially sound. This test asks how you feel, whereas all the others to this point have asked what you think. So you want to ask yourself the following questions. How do you feel about this action now? Will it lead to the quality of life you desire? Will it adversely affect the lives of others? and what will be the effects of not taking this action. You want to use this test when you've performed all of the other tests because it should take into account the mental and emotional picture that is formed after passing through all of the other tests. It's okay to solicit outside opinions and expert advice, but remember, ultimately this test can only be performed by you, the person who created your minimum holistic goal, because no one else will have the intimate level of understanding that you do of your desired quality of life and the holistic context that supports its realization. Here's an example straight from the pages of Holistic Management. Carol's parents have a horse ranch in Colorado. They have generously offered a gift horse to Carol and her husband Dave for their daughters to ride and enjoy. All Carol and Dave have to do, at least according to Carol's parents, is pay for the shipping of the horse to their farm in Vermont. Dave looks up the shipping costs, which are significant, but not too crazy if you're considering that the horse itself is a gift. Carol is about to call the shippers and arrange payment when Dave suggests that they test taking the horse versus not taking the horse. The gift horse, quite quickly, begins to fail many of the tests, particularly the financial ones. The horse isn't going to earn them any income on the farm. It will require feed, specialized veterinary care, possibly new fencing, and a specially constructed shelter. Carol and Dave also know next to nothing about caring for horses. Carol and Dave compare that cost with their goal for their family. They want to have a close, caring family that does things together. With one horse and 4 people, they realize that they would not be able to enjoy the horse as a family. The horse would be a solitary pursuit for one of them. It would take time and resources away from the family instead of bringing them together. Carol and Dave realized that for the same price as shipping the gift horse to Vermont, they could actually fly the whole family out to the grandparents' Colorado horse ranch, where they have many horses, all the facilities, equipment, and know-how, and spend a week riding horses together. The choice seems pretty easy after running the decision through their gut check, precisely because they'd taken the time to define what a high quality of life meant to them. Remember, your body is a finely tuned sensory organ. If you have a feeling about something, don't just ignore it or use your mind to find ways to rationalize away that feeling's existence or meaning. Instead, honor it. Even though we aren't exactly presented with popular examples of emotional intelligence by our mainstream culture, emotional intelligence is a real thing, and it's tremendously powerful when paired with your conscious awareness. So usually that feeling you have about something that is preventing you from taking action is actually an alarm trying to get your attention saying, hey, there's this thing here that you need to handle first before doing that. So take note and investigate what that feeling is and what it's actually trying to tell you. Okay, that is all 7 decision tests. Hope it's become clear by now that these tests are really just questions to ask yourself that, when answered honestly, will help you make better decisions as you move forward in designing and creating your homestead in support of your desired quality of life. To briefly recap, we started with cause and effect, where you continually ask, what is the root cause of this or that, until you drill down to the core problem or the design challenge that needs solving. The core problem is usually a resource management problem or a human behavior problem. For resource management problems, you will need to address either the water cycle, mineral cycle, energy flow, or community dynamics within your homestead landscape. For human behavior problems, you need to look first to yourself and examine your organizational structure, management style, communication methods, and/or leadership style. This test is always performed first. Always look for the root cause first. The second was the weakest link, in which you identify the weakest link in your chain of production. The chain is only as strong as its weakest link. There are 3 categories of weak links: social, biological, and financial. For social weak links, you examine whether or not your action based upon prevailing attitudes and beliefs could create a weak link in the chain of actions leading to your holistic goal. You are looking for a social weak link whenever the action under consideration could adversely impact the lives of those around you. Biological weak links apply when you are looking to maximize or minimize the number of a specific organism, and you do that by intervening at the point in its life cycle where it is weakest, so you can exert the greatest leverage to either increase or decrease its numbers. You need to identify the financial weak link when there is an unsustainable cost of production relative to profit within a system or enterprise. Our third test was marginal reaction. It's all about getting the biggest bang for your buck by determining which action provides the greatest return in terms of your holistic goal for the time and money spent. Use this test anytime there are expenditures to be made and alternatives to choose from. Fourth was gross profit analysis, aka show me the money. where you ask which enterprise contributes the most to covering the overhead costs of the business, homestead, or lifestyle. You then select the enterprises that, after taking into account all the associated costs and risks, produce the most income. The income from these enterprises is what creates a profitable homestead. Fifth was resource acquisition and use, where you examine current and future patterns of resource acquisition and use, and whether or not they are aligned with creating your desired quality of life. We use this test when a certain enterprise, system, or process is known to be necessary for the function of the larger whole of which it is a part, but can be run using different types of energy input. We also talked about the regenerative, degenerative continuum and the 5 categories of resources as a helpful tool to visually audit your system and propose patterns of resource acquisition and use. 6 was sustainability test. We use this test to evaluate a system, process, or enterprise for long-term energetic viability. We want to know that if we do X, it will lead us closer to or further from our desired quality of life and the proper state of our future resource base. We can also use the regenerative degenerative continuum in this step to help get a qualitative sense of the options available to us. And finally, we have the society and culture gut check test, which asks us primarily how we feel versus what we think. This test is always performed last because it is informed by the mental and emotional picture of all the other tests that preceded it. We want to honor those gut feelings and investigate them with a clear and methodical process. This is the melding of emotional and mental decision-making pathways. So that's it. Those are the 7 decision tests and how and when to apply them in designing, building, and evolving your homestead. Okay, that's it here. I'll see you in the next video.